At this stage of his affairs, Palissy became melancholy and almost hopeless, and seems to have all but broken down. He wandered gloomily about the fields near Saintes, his clothes hanging in tatters, and himself worn to a skeleton. In a curious passage in his writings he describes how that the calves of his legs had disappeared and were no longer able with the help of garters to hold up his stockings, which fell about his heels when he walked. The family continued to reproach him for his recklessness, and his neighbors cried shame upon him for his obstinate folly. So he returned for a time to his former calling, and after about a year's diligent labor, during which he earned bread for his household and somewhat recovered his character among his neighbors, he again resumed his darling enterprise. But, though he had already spent about 10 years in the search for the enamel, it cost him nearly 8 more years of experimental plodding before he perfected his invention. He gradually learned dexterity and certainty of result by experience, gathering practical knowledge out of many failures. Every mishap was a fresh lesson to him, teaching him something new about the nature of enamels, the qualities of argillaceous earths, the tempering of clays, and the construction and management of furnaces. At last, after about 16 years' labor, Palissy took heart and called himself potter. These 16 years had been his term of apprenticeship to the art, during which he had wholly to teach himself, beginning at the very beginning. He was now able to sell his wares and thereby maintain his family in comfort. But he never rested satisfied with what he had accomplished. He proceeded from one step of improvement to another, always aiming at the greatest perfection possible. He studied natural objects for patterns, and with such success that the great Buffon spoke of him as so great a naturalist as nature only can produce. His ornamental pieces are now regarded as rare gems in the cabinets of virtuosi, and sell at almost fabulous prices. The ornaments on them are for the most part accurate models from life, of wild animals, lizards, and plants, found in the fields about Saintes, and tastefully combined as ornaments into the texture of a plate or vase. When Palissy had reached the height of his art he styled himself ouvrier de terre inventeur de rustiques figurines. We have not, however, come to an end of the sufferings of Palissy, respecting which a few words remain to be said. Being a Protestant, at a time when religious persecution waxed hot in the south of France, and expressing his views without fear, he was regarded as a dangerous heretic. His enemies having informed against him, his house at Saintes was entered by the officers of justice, and his workshop was thrown open to the rabble, who entered and smashed his pottery, while he himself was hurried off by night and cast into a dungeon at Bordeaux, to wait his turn at the stake or the scaffold. He was condemned to be burned. But a powerful noble, the Constable de Montmorency, interposed to save his life, not because he had any special regard for Palissy or his religion, but because no other artist could be found capable of executing the enameled pavement for his magnificent chateau then in course of erection at Écouen, about 4 leagues from Paris. By his influence an edict was issued appointing Palissy inventor of rustic figurines to the king and to the constable, which had the effect of immediately removing him from the jurisdiction of Bordeaux. He was accordingly liberated, and returned to his home at Saintes only to find it devastated and broken up. His workshop was open to the sky, and his works lay in ruins. Shaking the dust of Saintes from his feet he left the place never to return to it, and removed to Paris to carry on the works ordered of him by the constable and the Queen Mother, being lodged in the Tuileries while so occupied. Besides carrying on the manufacture of pottery, with the aid of his 2 sons, Palissy, during the latter part of his life, wrote and published several books on the potter's art, with a view to the instruction of his countrymen, and in order that they might avoid the many mistakes which he himself had made. He also wrote on agriculture, on fortification, and natural history, on which latter subject he even delivered lectures to a limited number of persons. He waged war against astrology, alchemy, witchcraft, and like impostures. This stirred up against him many enemies, who pointed the finger at him as a heretic, and he was again arrested for his religion and imprisoned in the Bastille. He was now an old man of 78, trembling on the verge of the grave, but his spirit was as brave as ever. He was threatened with death unless he recanted. But he was as obstinate in holding to his religion as he had been in hunting out the secret of the enamel. The king, Henry III, even went to see him in prison to induce him to abjure his faith. "My good man," said the king, "you have now served my mother and myself for 45 years. We have put up with your adhering to your religion amidst fires and massacres. Now I am so pressed by the Guise party as well as by my own people, that I am constrained to leave you in the hands of your enemies, and tomorrow you will be burnt unless you become converted." "Sire," answered the unconquerable old man, "I am ready to give my life for the glory of God. You have said many times that you have pity on me. And now I have pity on you, who have pronounced the words I am constrained. It is not spoken like a king, sire. It is what you, and those who constrain you, the Guisards and all your people, can never effect upon me, for I know how to die." Palissy did indeed die shortly after, a martyr, though not at the stake. He died in the Bastille, after enduring about a year's imprisonment, there peacefully terminating a life distinguished for heroic labor, extraordinary endurance, inflexible rectitude, and the exhibition of many rare and noble virtues. The life of John Frederick Botter, the inventor of hard porcelain, presents a remarkable contrast to that of Palissy, though it also contains many points of singular and almost romantic interest. Botter was born at Schliess, in the Voigtland, in 1685, and at 12 years of age was placed apprentice with an apothecary at Berlin. He seems to have been early fascinated by chemistry, and occupied most of his leisure in making experiments. These for the most part tended in one direction, the art of converting common metals into gold. At the end of several years, Botter pretended to have discovered the universal solvent of the alchemists, and professed that he had made gold by its means. He exhibited its powers before his master, the apothecary Zorn, and by some trick or other succeeded in making him and several other witnesses believe that he had actually converted copper into gold. The news spread abroad that the apothecary's apprentice had discovered the grand secret, and crowds collected about the shop to get a sight of the wonderful young gold cook. The king himself expressed a wish to see and converse with him, and when Frederick I was presented with a piece of the gold pretended to have been converted from copper, he was so dazzled with the prospect of securing an infinite quantity of it, Prussia being then in great straits for money, that he determined to secure Botter and employ him to make gold for him within the strong fortress of Spandau. But the young apothecary, suspecting the king's intention, and probably fearing detection, at once resolved on flight, and he succeeded in getting across the frontier into Saxony. A reward of $1,000 was offered for Botter's apprehension, but in vain. He arrived at Wittenberg, and appealed for protection to the Elector of Saxony, Frederick Augustus I, King of Poland, surnamed the Strong. Frederick was himself very much in want of money at the time, and he was overjoyed at the prospect of obtaining gold in any quantity by the aid of the young alchemist. Botter was accordingly conveyed in secret to Dresden, accompanied by a royal escort. He had scarcely left Wittenberg when a battalion of Prussian grenadiers appeared before the gates demanding the gold maker's extradition. But it was too late. Botter had already arrived in Dresden, where he was lodged in the Golden House, and treated with every consideration, though strictly watched and kept under guard.